Recording. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our second running of our webinar on culture and inclusion. My name is Andre Double, and I'm the founder of Leading Your International School and the author of the book of the same name. Tonight, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you my friend, co-author of Leading Your International School and HR professional of nearly 30 years, Warren Cook. I've known Warren for over 4 years since we first began collaborating together. And I can honestly tell you there are few people that I've met who have his knowledge and enthusiasm for effective people leadership and company culture. So I can assure you, you're in good hands tonight. So Warren, great to be here. Over to you.
Yes, thanks, Andre and Jane, for putting all this together always and working on this. And thank you, everybody. If you haven't attended one of our webinars before that I've presented in, I really do look for an interactive session. I do look for engagement from the attendees, because the goal here is really to make sure you walk away with knowledge. I'm going to go through our agenda real quick and make sure that we know what we're talking about today and cover. But I also want to say that feel free during the presentation, the webinar, to throw any questions you have into the chat. Jane has been kind enough to monitor that for me, because I can't multitask and look at the chat at the same time. But if you do have any questions, throw them in there. It's a small group, so you can also unmute and ask a question if you like. We have no problem with that. I usually check at the end of each slide if there's any questions, or each topic. If you ask something that I know I'm going to cover later, I'll just let you know. And if you ask something that's relevant, we'll just get right into it and right to it for shared learning. So excited that you're all here and excited to be here and provide this to you. So I'll do a quick introduction and my goals of today's webinar. We'll talk about the challenges that we face as leaders in organizations and related to culture specifically. We're going to go through in depth all the different components of culture. We'll talk about inclusion and how I define inclusion and how you should consider in the perception of inclusion. We'll talk about engagement. We'll explore methods and ways you can implement engaging activities and how you can put engagement in a lot of the processes and practices that you use in your everyday activities as a school leader. And then we're going to talk about some of the success factors. What are the critical factors you need to make sure you're considering and doing as you go through the process of building, maintaining, and really promulgating your culture. And then practical strategies. For me, it's all about what can you start doing today or tomorrow? Well, it's evening there now, so maybe you'll wait till tomorrow, but you could start doing things immediately. I want to give you takeaways that you can work on immediately. And then we'll have open forum QA also, in case you wanted to hold your questions to the end, but you can ask at any time. So Andre mentioned it. I am extremely passionate about people leadership and taking care of people, growing people. I think the foundation of every organization are its people. I take the concept of the greatest asset in an organization is the human capital. Obviously, without systems and processes and programs, you can't accomplish anything. But I'm very passionate about building culture and engaging in inclusive culture, because most organizations I've had to consult with or I've worked for in the private sector, the public sector, in the court systems, wherever it may be, across industries and platforms, is their culture wasn't aligned, that there was some belief at a high level of what culture was, and then execution or actual feeling of the culture at the lowest levels of the organization was never really aligned. So very passionate about helping organizations get there, because the closer you get there to that alignment, generally the more successful you can be at growing your business, at scaling your school, at meeting your vision and mission goals, but also just having everybody going in the same direction, and it impacts so many things, as we'll learn through this. And then I want to provide you practical strategies that you can implement immediately. So I want to cover some challenges that organizations can face, but I'm going to give you a case study as well as to how people have used culture to solve those problems. Now, I'm going to make various references to the book that Andre and I wrote, and chapter 6 of our text is really heavily focused on culture, but it permeates throughout the whole text. But Andre did a great job in his research bringing culture to light with the Royal Marines and Deal, and talking about how culture is really what allowed them to bounce back, and how they treated those Marines, and how they followed through after disaster. He also covered the United World College and the commitment to demonstrating their culture through action, right? Actually demonstrating it. And so here on this slide, you can, and you'll find through this presentation too, I generally don't read slides to an audience. You're all intelligent people. But here we're talking about the challenges that an organization can face, right? So you may be facing some of these right now. You may be facing all of these. You may be facing one of these. But generally, there's challenges and obstacles that organizations face that they either don't realize how their culture can positively improve that challenge or obstacle, or they don't recognize how the human resources component fits in to make that change and make that adjustment. And so something as simple as how you bring cultures together and embrace differences, how you make sure you improve your recognition programs, and how you retain staff, which in international schools becomes a significant challenge from year to year, depending on the size of your school or the location, or maybe just the turnover, because it's hard to keep people at your organization. So I want to kind of go through a case study with you, but do any of these challenges, you can just throw this real quickly, or you can shout out on unmute and shout out. Do any of these challenges resonate with anybody? Do these seem like realistic challenges that you may face or have faced in your organization? If so, just give us some confirmation that we're on the right track here, but this is what mostly organizations will face. So, from a case study perspective, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals. Johnson & Johnson Pharmaceuticals, I worked with them for many years and consulted with them over the years with various aspects of their leadership and some of their affiliates. For 133 years, they have a guiding principle called their credo. And this credo drives everything they do. The leadership, the organization, everything is based on this credo. And in fact, in recent years, it's been translated into over 35 languages globally. In many of their offices around the world, they literally have stone carvings in their lobbies that have this information. That's their commitment to this. Carving something in stone means it's going to last a while, right? They promulgate this messaging in everything they do, from when you're hired until you retire and beyond. And it was their driving factor in kind of saving their business and growing it in 1982. So again, if you're not familiar with what happened in 1982 in the US, there was an incident that's referred to as the Tylenol incident, where someone had started opening boxes of Tylenol or containers of Tylenol and putting cyanide, and murdered many people. And as soon as these killings started happening and they identified that it was this Tylenol product from J&J, Tylenol themselves, without being ordered to do so, followed their credo, which the credo is listed there at the bottom, which their first responsibility includes the patients, people using their products or services, and voluntarily recalled 200,000 bottles of Tylenol off the shelves. Voluntarily. They didn't have to, they weren't ordered to, and they lost over, after you take out all their net and all their costs, they lost over $15 million. And if you think of the time value of money back in 1982, that was a significant loss. And at the time, people thought J&J would just simply go out of business. And the reverse happened. J&J demonstrated to the world their commitment to people. And this opportunity to save lives also turned around, demonstrating their culture, that their care of people resulted in new product development. So anytime you take a caplet now, anytime you have a medicine bottle that has a security cap on it, anytime you have a medicine bottle or any kind of drug that has that foil cap under the top cap, that's all a result of Johnson & Johnson changing our world in protecting patients. And they dedicate that entire success and improvements for just our health and well-being to their credo and to their culture. And so that's one example of how culture really is something that you should think about, not as just a passing, fleeting thought. Your culture really is, as some of you mentioned in the chat early on, your culture really is something to take advantage of and put time and energy into, because there's so much you can get out of it on the back end. So any questions about just challenges or just that case study that I can answer? And Jane, just if you could tell me if there are any questions as we go, let me know. But I'll keep moving along. So culture. When I think about culture, and I define it, and we talk about this in the text as well, it's the behavioral norms and actions of your workforce. So I've met with CEOs and leaders all over the world, and they will tell me a million different things about what their culture is. And then if I go and ask someone in their line staff, if I go and ask the receptionist, if I go ask the janitor, they have a completely different idea of what that culture is. And so really think about whatever is actually happening in your workforce, the actual modeled behaviors, the actual demonstration through the constructs of culture, which we're about to cover. That is your culture. Whether you like it or not, that's the real culture. And this reality check I have on the screen is how your leadership team, how your staff, how your teachers, how your students, how you all interact and behave and go through executing their roles or being a student or attendee is what makes up your culture. It's kind of what's happening. And so we want to talk about what are the constructs and components that contribute to that and that we can think about, because you can influence your culture. It's not a snap your finger or wave your wand, but you can influence culture and you can make significant changes to it. So before I go into the constructs of it, are there any questions, Jane, or comments that I need to address? Nope.
No, not for now.
Okay. All righty. So constructs of culture, and I put it in a heart because, it should be, culture should bring everybody together. But you have language, communication, artifacts, stories, myths, and legends, ceremonies, value, ethics, and moral code, which is many of you talked about this evening in the chat, and decision-making style. So we're going to dive into these categories before we move into kind of the practical strategies, inclusion, and engagement. But I'm going to cover each one of these, and if you have dialogue and have some questions, again, this is all about you taking away knowledge that you can use to really improve your school and improve your leadership. So culture from a language perspective, we're not simply talking about what language you speak. Is it Chinese? Is it English? Is it some form of in India? Is it wherever you're at in the world? But more about how we communicate within the business, within the organization, within the school. So are you using face-to-face communication? Are you using any kind of direct messaging? Are you using a Slack tool or a Zoom tool? What is it that you're using to communicate? How do they do it? And then what is the tone and what words do you use? When you're speaking to each other, is it first name based? Is it a last name based? Is it sir? Is it madam? How are you addressing people? So how you do those things really starts setting the tone around your culture, around what you expect from others. If you think about it, culture isn't just something you want to achieve, but it's also an expectation you're setting on everybody that joins your group, your school, your organization, right? Your entity. So whatever your culture is, you're hoping everybody that comes on board adopts it. And then you hope everybody that's already there promulgates it, right? Models it. So how you speak to each other, how you interact, how you communicate is a critical piece of showing and proving what your culture is. And I throw acronyms on the list here because I mentioned earlier to you all that I worked in pharmaceuticals. And I will tell you, in some other businesses I've worked in, they've had an acronym list of 20 or 30 acronyms they use. When I was in pharmaceuticals, they would hand out a 15-page document that would be the acronyms. And unfortunately, for my little brain, I don't know why three letters, the same three letters meant 10 different things, depending on where you were at. So if you do have various acronyms or things that you use, special context of words in your school, make sure you're during orientation and other times you're presenting it, using it, and educating the audience on what it is. It takes me back to my doctoral program in IO psychology, where they would say, listen, never use an acronym in anything you're writing professionally or academically until you first spell it out, right? So that's all about just making sure someone knows what you're talking about. Same thing here with culture and language. So language is definitely something you want to think about in a component of your culture. The next piece is communication. Now, language and communication are two different things. So communication is more about who is talking to who, right? Can a staff member talk to the principal? Does the principal have access to the board? Do teachers have access to each other? Are there administrative or professionals or service providers within the organization from technology or other platforms that people have access to when they need it? Or are they restricted, right? How do the people within the school talk to the outside world? How are your public relations handled? Are there ambassadors of your organization, both internally and externally? Do you have ambassadors that are alumni that are viewed as ambassadors for the school? Do you have folks that are leaving the organization and still talk positively about your culture and your organization? If there's any incidents or if there's anything positive going on, if there's events happening, how are you interacting and modeling your culture? You know, it's one thing to have public relations or interact with the outside world. It's another to make sure you're embedding your culture in all that you do. You know, I don't know if any of you have involvement with marketing or sales or just websites in general, but there's a term that marketing uses out there called SEO, search engine optimization. And it's all about keywords and key terms, all about marketing craziness. But one of the concepts of that is making sure you're consistent in how you communicate your messaging. Well, cultures are around the same thing. You're communicating your culture in everything you do. And so when you walk out of the school and you're at a restaurant with your family and someone recognizes you, how you handle yourself is still communicating as an ambassador of that organization, your culture. So again, I'll just turn to you, Jane. If there are any questions, just shoot them out to me, and feel free, audience, if you want to just unmute and chime in. So artifacts are more visual. So the artifacts of your organization are going to be things you can see easily or others can see about you. And that's why modeling behavior for culture is really so critical. And so in this perspective here with modeling culture, these images are really to kind of contrast what could be going on in the organization. So on the left side, we have dress code. And in a lot of the business world, people move to a business casual environment, or they change their dress code, or you had COVID pushing people remote and people think that they can just work in their pajamas, whatever that may be. But it's a drastically different view of an organization simply visually, right? Something as easy as the dress code, something as easy as the staff's dress code. You know, do they align? Is the staff very casual, but the students have to be very formal and professional? So the left and right side are more about how are you representing as an organization coherently, right? Consistently and coherently, what message are you presenting to an organization? I think back too of it's not just about formal or casual that's setting a tone. When I would consult with information technology firms, I would find it interesting because I would show up at a suit and tie. And after about a month, several of these organizations, all of them, would say, can you stop doing that? Say, can I stop showing up? They say, no. Can you stop showing up in a suit? And they say, can you come in jeans and a t-shirt or dress down? Just stop this. Their workforce was so relaxed and casual that I was that consultant that they thought was coming in to fire everybody. And they've watched the movie The Office and they were really worried. But here it is about just make sure you're modeling, and also make sure that those that are joining your organization also understand those expectations clearly, not just that you do it, but why you do it. Okay. Now, the middle two pictures here are more about ergonomics, but it's also about the artifacts of an organization and how this can really send messaging in culture. Now, I'm going to give you an example around this. You know, when I look at these two pictures, the bottom picture looks like a formal classroom. You're sitting at a table, and in the front is some presenter or some of the information. In the top picture, I just see a very engaging, collaborative, open environment. So let's say you were trying to promulgate a culture of inclusiveness and openness and great communication in the workplace. And you had the bottom, or you were going on an interview in that organization, right? So your principal, you're about to go land a new job at a new school, and you walked in and no one at the front desk greeted you. You sat down at the front desk, someone was busy on the phone, and then suddenly someone came down the hallway and took you to the conference room. But as you walked down the hallway to this conference room where your interview was going to be conducted, it was just a hallway of offices, and every office door was closed, right? So weren't welcomed at the front desk, see offices, doors closed, and you get in the conference room for your interview. In contrast, you walk into the next school and you're immediately welcomed by the receptionist, and they offer you a bottle of water. They ask if you're comfortable. They let you know that the person you're meeting with is going to be right with you. And then when they meet and greet you, when you walk down the hallway to get to that conference room, there's no offices. It's a completely open floor plan with round tables and open areas, and everybody just seems to be collaborating around tables. Right off the bat, even if you get in that interview room and that first interview panel tells you they're an engaging environment, you know right off the bat that it's not even as possible or as efficient as the second environment, right? And it had nothing to do with what they're telling you. It's what you observed, those artifacts of the organization you observed. So everything you do with your school, that is visually observable from the outside public, or how you design your classrooms, your organization, your school, really also tells a story around your culture. It's kind of like why J&J puts concrete blocks in lobbies and carves their credo in there to send a message. Same thing for you. How you're demonstrating these things is really critical and really important. From a perspective, from a construct of stories, myths, and legends, when I think about what is important in an organization and really what brings people together, it's stories. Whether you hear a rumor mill through the grapevine, oh, you're not going to believe who did this, or do you remember the party 4 years ago and what happened? But you should think about this construct of stories, myths, and legends in a very intentional way. If you have a current organization where you're building a culture, or you're trying to drive a new culture or change and shift the culture, having stories to tell about why and having activities and things to reference back to is critical. Because without those stories, you really can't have much success in accomplishing it. And the stories could just be lessons you learned from mistakes the organization's made, positive events that have happened, large shifts in organization, large shift in leadership. New president came in and such happened for the good or the bad, right? Whatever it might be, new ownership. All those become part of your story. But what I want to really emphasize is if you have retention problems, if you have high turnover, your stories disappear and fade away as those people exit your organization. And so you really need to make sure that you're intentional in documenting and capturing what these important historical stories of your organization are, so they do have time and they can become legends and myths over time, right? That they become that myth and they become that legend that's what you're known for. I want to bring up, that most of us from a human perspective, and I go here a lot, and we talk about this in our book as well. A lot of it is mutual experiences, right? So when I think about some things, and if I talk to my friends or peers today, or anybody that's around my age, if I bring up the 1987 Challenger explosion, the Challenger spaceship explosion, most people my age can tell me where they were and what they were doing at the time, right? You go into and you go to the horrible crisis of 9/11 and then other events around the world that people normally can remember when that happened. This generation, all of us are going to be telling our grandkids about that thing, COVID, that happened, right? They're never going to believe us. They're going to say, you're out of your mind. But we're all going to say, oh my God, you're not going to believe it. Come 2020, the world came to a halt. But we can all relate to what that meant to us, right? Changing in technology, changing in work, changing in environment, how we had to protect our families. It's a common event that is a shared story that adds to the culture of the human race. In your school, there's going to be events of your school that should add to that storyline, that reinforce your culture and really bring people together. And normally when you have orientation, you present these stories to the audience, right? You present this to the attendees. You share those stories so they get really good insight into why you do what you do. So I'll take a quick pause there because this is a really important topic of it. But any questions or comments going on? Because I see the number in the chat room going up, but I just want to pause and see if there's anything I need to address.
Yeah, hi Warren. So we've just talked about communication and communication styles, different forms of communication.
Sure.
Parents' evenings, online systems, and the importance of face-to-face communication. So I think still after what we've been through COVID, still teachers still recognizing the importance of actually sitting down face-to-face. Particularly in China, where the differences in meanings, ensuring that there's alignment between, both sets of thinking.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Taking advantage of being back face-to-face, taking advantage of that engagement is critical. We had a really great perspective in our prior session, and I bring this up as well. If you're not in person, and video is kind of hard to do, but emotional intelligence, which is critical as we grow as a race and from a human capital perspective in identifying and reading, using and managing emotions in the workplace to really achieve success, that doesn't happen too effectively when you're on a phone call. That doesn't happen as effectively on a video. It happens most effectively in person and building those relationships. So I'm glad you're having that chat that's going on. Perfect.
We have
so
we have a question here from Kate. Sorry.
Hi, Kate.
Warren. Yeah,
Yeah.
so Kate wants to know, do stories and events have to be one-off events, or can they be recurring as they can help establish a culture? Very good question, Kate. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think it can be recurring. I think to one of the high schools I attended here in the U.S., one of the big events that whatever happened in that event really set the tone for the school year. And I don't mean it like in a business sense or in a national school sense, but there was a school rivalry between two schools that every Thanksgiving was their football game. And every year, the victor were the ones that had the story to tell about we won the game and we're the better school and all those types of things. So it was an annual event that kind of dictated it was almost an 85-year historical activity, but it was something that they tracked and maintained. Just like in the U.S., you have the Army-Navy football game. There's something about that happens every year that is bringing people together and causing people to have something in common. In one of the organizations I worked with, around Thanksgiving each year, they had an event where they brought everybody's families in and gave out turkeys. And even it was an annual event, it was the idea of how did it start and why did they still do it and why were we continuing doing it? So absolutely, Kate, you can use recurring events to tell a very similar story. And the positive out of that is each year you have new results of the initiative or the event. Maybe you do some volunteer work in the community. Maybe you have some social responsibility activities that you do and you're promoting. So doing it repeatedly over and over builds to that story, but you're also have some starting point that also tells the story of why you're doing it. So great question. Did that answer your question, by the way? Feel free to go off. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, you did. I think you established how to make it things, because I was thinking if it's a recurring thing, you lose that newness of it and the excitement. But as you pointed out, with, for example, the Army Navy is the winning, or if you're going into the community and doing a charity event, how you kind of established how you can make that a new event each year so that it's still a relevant part of your culture and your story. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You just made me think of something else. Habitat for Humanity, when organizations will get folks together and go build a house for somebody, for example, right? You don't have to say, oh, every year we build a house, right? You could say that. You could say every year we go out and build a house. And that would be a pretty lame, inefficient way of leveraging that activity. I mean, certainly it's a wonderful event. But if you say, hey, this year we build a house for someone in this community, in this culture, and not only do we build the house, but we're going to celebrate their culture, right? We're going to celebrate more about them. I had a client in New York who tried to sell online on an Amazon store. They sold paintings, just paintings and home decor. And they were really struggling, like, how do we make this more important to our communities? So I asked a really simple question, and this is how I consult and engage. I said, well, what's special about the painting? And they're like, oh, the design. I said, no, you're missing the point. Isn't the artist what's special about the painting? Because they went out in the communities in New York and all over the country to find unique artists who were unknown artists who you can't find their artwork anywhere else. They barely do anything. And they were designing the artwork and decor around that artist. And I said, well, why not share the story about the artist? Where are they from? What is their culture? What are they doing? And they went from $20 million in sales to over $35 million the next year. They increased $15 million in top line revenue because they highlighted the culture of the artist. And so it's just, how did they take that new event? And to them, the event, Kate, was a new artist. Now we found a new artist, so new decor, new artist, new decor, added lines of project. But if you're doing Habitat for Humanity, if you're doing whatever it is you're doing, find ways to really leverage why. Because deep down, everybody isn't thinking about it deep down. But if you dive into the root of why you're doing it, I guarantee one of two things. Either it is part of your culture and you need to highlight it, or you're not connecting the dots to your culture and that's why it's not working. So it's one or the other. Okay, you're doing something over here and people go, why are they doing that? Their mission is this. Or they go, oh my God, it makes so much sense because they're trying to do X. So really, you can bring that together. So great question, and thanks for being brave enough to ask and chime in. So the next two areas
For-
we're going to, yeah.
Yeah, Johan, I think he made a really good comment. He said that, his school is trying to shape a culture in a new, in a rural area in Namibia. And one of the biggest challenges that they're facing is the very conservative nature of the community, and they're trying to, break out of these the traditional molds of their community. So yeah, it's a big challenge.
We should talk about that, because one of the things that were brought up in another session, and something that's just brought up in my entire consulting career, is what do you do when you have opposing or adversarial or contradicting views or perspective when you're trying to get something done? So you're trying to do something very good in that rural community, and the community itself might be hesitant, might not be adopting change, might be resistant to change. I highly recommend, and we touch on this a little bit in the text as well, but just talking through it will help. You have to first make sure that you've aligned with all the leaders and all the people of influence in that community, and help ensure that they recognize that you and they have mutual goals. Do you have mutual goals? Are you both trying to accomplish the same thing? They're trying to accomplish something from an educational perspective for their community, but maybe they don't have the expertise or competence or knowledge how, or maybe they haven't been as successful as they'd like. You're coming into the area. Maybe you were welcomed, maybe not, but if you were welcomed, but they just don't understand, or they're concerned and nervous. Nobody likes change. It's the only constant, but nobody likes change. So if you're coming in there with this change, maybe it's about, what are your goals? Let's reaffirm together in person. You meet and you say, your goals for the community are X. That's our goals as well. But it seems like our path forward, our strategies may not be as clear, might not be as aligned as how you've done it. Let's talk about what you'd like to accomplish and how we believe our solution is going to help you do that. Bridging that gap by getting to the point of mutual goal and mutual relationship, making sure it's symbiotic, often will help mitigate some of that, controversy and adversarial aspects. It doesn't work 100%. It takes time. It's not an overnight thing. But I would definitely meet with them. And there's a lot of strategies you can employ of bringing those folks together. Manage the conflict, don't resolve it, manage it, and then focus on mutual goals, so you can kind of navigate there and slowly implement what you need to in that community. So hopefully you have a lot of success with that. But if you need some guidance or coaching on that's kind of what we're here to help with. Alrighty. So from a ceremonies or assemblies perspective and culture, this first slide is about the staff. And I have two very contrasting pictures here. The one on the left is really referencing, do you have meetings? Do you have a morning huddle? I think schools are phenomenal at maintaining a morning announcements, or a morning session of information, or a gathering or get together of the school or groups. But if you do have these things, are they consistent? Is what's taking place in those events consistently modeling the culture? On the right here, you have people in a social environment, right? So maybe they go out after hours and have drinks. Maybe they go to dinner. Maybe they have some social event. But in those events, you want to make sure, because people are watching, and if they know you're part of the school, how is it being modeled? Are they demonstrating the same core behaviors and modeling the beliefs and values of the school, no matter what environment they're in? The other thing I want to watch out is having rogue people leaders. Do you have someone who kind of doesn't really get or doesn't buy into the culture, and they kind of do their own thing, and now they're building a little clique or a little group of people that are doing things contrary to the culture? Those become toxic areas of your school, and you have to address them, confront them, and weed them out, or get them to model the behavior properly. So one other thing about events and social events or gatherings that you may have in or out of the school or in or out of the workplace is these become risky environments, risky events, things that can go wrong if not controlled and if they're not being managed well, and can also ruin your reputation or give you poor perception from the outside world. So be very careful about those types of things. But from a culture perspective, what we're talking about is maybe your staff meetings. Maybe you need to model for everybody how to handle an effective staff meeting. Maybe you want to model what should happen if they're out in a social environment. So those are some types of things of like what the staff should and shouldn't be doing. And then performance reviews and engagement surveys, these two things, and we're going to talk about engagement surveys a little bit more in a few minutes, but performance reviews also are an opportunity to not only model communication and language and engagement and setting expectations, but do you measure in your performance reviews, are you measuring areas of culture. Are you measuring how they model behavior? Are they measuring how they lead their teams? Are you measuring how they communicate to ensure that you're not only measuring performance as a teacher or as administrative staff or as a member of leadership, but are you measuring their behaviors that align with the culture? Because if you're not, you're missing an opportunity to help them, teach them, train them, and also promulgate consistency. Switching over to the school student body, right? From the students and parents. I put these three pictures here intentionally because I found it very interesting that they're all considered assemblies in a school, but the one on the left has everyone kind of sitting down. They looked relaxed. They look really together. The one in the center looks like the staff or leadership are involving the students, that they're involved in the activity. And the one on the right looks like a very structured, formal type of event going on. Just know that as you have these different events, that how you structure it, how you execute it is very indicative of your culture. It's what you're setting as expectation. So if I walked into your school as a new student and I observed one of these three, I would immediately in my mind have some vision of what's expected of me. And then also, are you communicating what they can expect from you? Is it interactive? Is it engaging? Are you just dictating down to the student body, or are you engaging and giving information and welcoming feedback? And then these are all opportunities to tell those stories we were just talking about and to reinforce your values, your ethics, and your moral code, which we're about to jump into. But leverage these environments and these opportunities to really model behavior. I worked with one school and organization here in the US. And as soon as they would get everybody, all the students into the room, whoever was speaking suddenly was in charge and the other teachers walked out to go to the break room. And everybody saw it. Everybody knew that, oh, okay, so this is their break time. They don't care what's going on, but we just have to sit in this room in this huge assembly area and just one person has to take control. So every little thing you're doing, someone is watching. And you have opportunities to model what you want to have happen and, kind of like roll up your sleeves, get in there and do it, right? So very important how you handle these assemblies and how you involve parents. Of course, your culture is going to be something that you're promulgating, involving and modeling and demonstrating to the teachers, to the parents as well, and the families, because you want them to model the behavior and help the students do it at home as well. But also that's how you're going to attract people and things like that. But at the end of the day, really, you're always on cue for modeling that behavior. And this was brought up in the chat room in the beginning, right? Values, ethics, moral code. So you really have to figure out, what are your values, right? Are they clear? Are they documented? Is everybody in line? Are you consistent in how you demonstrate what the values are? And then what do you stand for as a school? We stand for education. Okay, it's got to be more than that. We stand for preparing the youth for the future. Okay, great. But is it more than that? We want them to be, those that are changing the future. Okay, great. Now let's get there, right? Like, what are the values you're building? And then how do you show that that's what your school really stands for in your actions? Okay. And then some other things to think about is, people don't put in their jobs descriptions interesting requirements around value, ethics, and moral code. Are you putting ethical obligations or expectations in your job description? Are you writing your job description about promulgating the core values of the organization? Are you putting in there, one of the responsibilities is to make sure they're communicating in a certain way? Because if you start with the job description, then it moves to the interview, it moves to the hiring process, and you're going to hire talent that are already demonstrating the behaviors that align with your culture. And so there's a lot of strategy and thought into how you bring culture into every aspect of the organization. It can even be your ethics and values and moral code in what type of vendors you have, what type of suppliers you have. If one of your suppliers is known to mistreat people, but you use them because they're the cheapest, you're not really demonstrating really good values as a leadership team for your organization and your school, right? If you're using that supplier. So be consistent. And then it's about accountability. Are you accountable to each other and to the students and to the teachers and to the parents and to the community in following through on it? So if you're doing those things well and you're modeling that, you really can start setting a great foundation. And then leadership and decision-making. And in this, it's really, what actions and behaviors does leadership model? How are decisions made? If you don't educate your organization on how decisions are actually made, you could lose an opportunity to get process improvements or feedback. And who makes those decisions? And I will tell you that there are definitely differences in saying in our organization, we're collaborative and everybody has a voice and the leadership team, can make decisions. If the reality is some executive, some board member is actually the one who can veto it all and just make the decision, you might have a problem. You might have a challenge. If you have people leaders who are trying to contribute to making change and they have no influence whatsoever to make that change, you're sending the wrong message. And, in this left picture, we have no idea who the leader is. And in the right picture, it just reinforces the fact that bosses are dictators. They're telling you what to do. They're pushing it down. They think everybody's there to serve them. And I'd encourage your culture and I'd encourage your organization from a human perspective to really focus on leading and creating followership and demonstrating that you're a servant leader, right? Situational servant leader, that you're there to give everybody what they need to be successful. So things that are really important for me in school culture are these 4 items are really critical. And we're going to shift to talk about a few other things here about the benefits of your culture. So expectations for leadership and staff, right? That's what culture is doing. It's setting expectations both sides. What you expect of them, what they can expect of you. It guides people on how to communicate. It's going to clearly define your value, ethics, and moral code of the school, right? And hopefully the people in the organization align with that. People in the organization who do not align with those values, ethics, and morals, that don't align with your culture, you either need them to shift their behavior or you need them out of your organization. Doesn't matter how skilled they are, how technical they are. If they're not part of the culture, ultimately they're going to be a problem for you. Okay. And really it modeling that behavior. And then from a benefits perspective, and I'm sure it's all should be resonating, but your core values are really intensely held, right? They're really shared values. Those shared values, like the case studies we talked about and the 2 stories Andre shared in our book, if you don't have that strong culture, when calamity hits, it is harder to succeed and get through it. You can really get through that storm if you have a culture of bringing people together and everyone's aligned for mutual goals and mutual purpose. Okay. But a good culture also is going to address that retention problem. You can retain people more effectively and efficiently when they're all on the same page. You can hire talent more effectively because people want to work at an organization and a school that has a tremendous culture, right? And not just the buzzword culture, but truly can demonstrate a good culture. You build loyalty and trust in your organization. You build diversity of thought and inclusion. So engagement, inclusion, which we're about to talk about. And then there's just consistency, right? You can sustain long-term when everybody's on the same page and you've built a culture that can just be repeated and modeled and is sustainable and effective, and you can prove it, right? You can prove culture is impacting your organization by demonstrating these things. So I'm going to go into inclusion now, but are there any questions on the benefits or the strengths of culture itself, just the definition of culture? And you can unmute and throw a question out there, or you can just throw it in the chat and Jane can share with me if there's a question. Everybody still with me this evening? Yes?
Yeah,
good.
Kate
All right.
made-
Fantastic.
Made
all
a
right.
comment.
Pardon me? Was
He
any-
made a
Okay.
made a comment. She said, trust is vital to your community and helping build your culture through
Yes.
consistency. Yeah.
Yes.
And Mr.
And trust
McIntosh
has to be earned genuinely. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes too, but genuine trust is showing care. So that's great. So inclusion, I will tell you that my passion on inclusion also goes into a passion of anger at times, because the inclusion is not diversity. I literally go across the country here in the US delivering presentations called Got Diversity, Get Inclusion, because you already have diversity, whether you believe it or not. I'll prove it. But so inclusion defined is just the action or state of including people or being included in a group. That's not diversity. I was hired many years ago into an organization who said they wanted diversity. I walked into the room, it was 12 Caucasian males of a board, and they said, bring our organization diversity. And I said, you're already diverse. And they just laughed. They said, no, we're not. Maybe you're the wrong guy. And I said, all right. And I went around the room and I asked everybody in the room to tell me how much money they make, how much money was in their bank account, where they grew up, what zip code they were raised, what college they went to, what their parents did for a living. And suddenly everybody was different. They all might have had the same skin color. They all might have had the same language, but they were very different. And so diversity is something you're going to leverage by having an inclusive culture and environment. But diversity is already there. Now, if you're talking about affirmative action, If you're talking about intentionally trying to hire people to meet some type of goal of a community's representation, that's something different. That's more of a compliance thing. That's more of a social equity thing that you're trying to fix past problems. But if you're in a truly inclusive environment and culture, it's purely about giving everybody a voice, recognizing everybody in the organization can bring value, taking titles and hats off and looking at people regardless of their level or their role or their expertise and bringing them together for mutual goals and aligning with the success of the organization, right? And so it's something you do intentionally and something you do in every aspect of the organization. I had people I worked with that really had struggled hiring millennials. And they said, I'm not going to do it. I've been in business for 60 years. I'm not hiring millennials. And I asked them the simple question of, who do you sell to? And they said, what do you mean? I said, do you sell to millennials? They're like, of course we do. We love money. Money's green. I said, but you don't care about their perspective? Like, you don't care about whether or not your product meets their needs? You don't care about whether your services align with them? They're like, well, we do. I said, well, how would you fix that if you don't have any millennials in your organization? Who are you asking questions to? Who are you engaging? Even if there's generational gaps in an organization, you should bring those people almost intentionally together to share ideas. And another piece of inclusion that I find odd, you know, if I have a group of people trying to build a new product, build a new service, develop a new curriculum, you know, oftentimes I'll say, why don't you have any students in here? Why do you only have teachers? Or why don't you have HR in here? Or why don't you have this in here? Why don't you have the technology leader in here? And they're like, why? They don't build curriculum. No, but they're the stakeholders. They're the ones who have to put the curriculum into the system. They're the ones who have to hear the curriculum. They're the ones who have to view the curriculum. So it's really making sure that being thoughtful and intentional about who should be involved, who are your stakeholders, right? Who are your dependencies? If you make a change, who's impacted, right? That's another opportunity to align with your culture and values and include everybody that's necessary in the process. And I don't mean have 75 people in the room every time you have a meeting. I just mean be intentionally cognitive and recognize the various areas, functional areas, or expertise in the organization, and involve them at the appropriate times to get things done, right? And make sure that their voices are heard. So, you know, inclusion to me is critical. It's such a huge part of society now that everybody wants to feel included no matter what. But if you go about it the political way or the diversity way, I don't think you're going to really have as much success if you look at the pure definition, meaning bring people together. Just bring people together and collaborate, right? And whatever you're doing. Changing over to any questions on inclusion?
Yeah, sorry, Warren.
Yeah.
I think Henny is. It would appear to be a bit of a culture expert here. So if Henny's there, I'd like to bring them in to talk about the way that they connected culture and leadership. They actually had a strategy where they didn't have a center point of knowledge, so that they had this kind of linearity, so that they were able to change roles within the organization very, very easily. If Henny's there and is able to describe that, it sounds fascinating. Henny, are you there?
Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can.
I'm no
Yeah.
expert.
Yes.
Yeah, so basically, as I mentioned previously, we have OKRs every year. And one of the OKRs were making sure that we promote professional development within the school system to ensure that teachers have a pathway to leadership if that is their future dream to get there. So what we made sure of doing is that we ensured that there's no more center point of knowledge. So basically the head of school took a step back and just led. And from that, he started appointing, okay, so who's my next in line, and made sure, okay, listen, that person will get the necessary PD to take over head of school. Same with your heads of department, normal teacher moving to head of department moving to dean of students or vice principals. So just basically that step from teacher to middle management to SMT, to where there is no longer just one center point.
Fantastic. That's a great model to have. And focusing on your succession planning is critical. Your culture can be permeated and promulgated and certainly sustained. And thank you, Henny, for sharing, by making sure your succession plans are not only teaching the technical aspects of the job that they're going to assume, but how to promote and maintain that culture, that inclusion, that engagement. One of the pharmaceutical companies I worked with was having a really hard time with their middle management and upper management, the succession planning, because in pharmaceutical companies, you have an entire population that's extremely technical, life science technical, right? They're in the labs, they're doing research, they're PhDs. And then you had their people managers. And sometimes the people managers wanted to go over and get in the lab. And sometimes people in the lab wanted to go and be in management. They were tired of being in the lab. But the way they had their job descriptions for years, it would literally say 5 years of people leadership. Well, they didn't have 5 years of people leadership. They had 25 years in a lab with a PhD, I think well qualified, but didn't have those 5 years of people leadership. And vice versa, it would say, you must have 2 years of lab experience. Well, this manager might have been managing the lab for 15 years. So why couldn't they go in the lab? So we had to take a step back, like your organization, Henny, and say, well, where is the real knowledge and expertise, and what are the competencies that you need? And we redesigned the entire competency model for the entire organization of, I think it was like 15,000 employees, where we would show transferable competencies. If you were an individual contributor in the lab doing X, Y, and Z after a certain amount of time, we would consider that sufficient qualification to do X. And if you were sufficient on the people leadership side, that also meant you could sufficiently do this. Still meant you might need training and coaching, which we were going to provide, but we no longer prohibited that migration from one type to the other type of role. And what your organization sounds like they did is they had a recognition of, let's focus on the professional development of the roles, but not make it happen in one place, and not direct it to all come from one place, where we really could spread that knowledge out. So great example of that. And your culture is what should allow you to do that. If your values are growing people and developing people, what you did, Henny, in your organization is showing it, right? You actually demonstrated that you do care about that. So fantastic job on that. And thanks for your willingness to share. So from an engagement perspective, these topics right here, talent, orientation, onboarding, you can read. Here they are. These are things that you have opportunities. You're already doing these things, or I'm hoping you're doing all of these 6 things here and doing them efficiently and effectively. If you're not, let's talk. But in each of these categories, you have opportunities to engage the workforce and then also embed your culture and other practices into it. And so we're going to go through these quickly, and we'll pass out the slide deck after the presentation. We always do. But from talent acquisition, how do you use that to create an engagement, right? For example, do you do job fairs? Do you have a careers page on your website? Do you use social media, right? Are you advertising? Do you have marketing materials around talent acquisition? In all of those, do you have consistent messaging that tie back to that vision, mission, values, moral code that show and represent your culture, right? Is it part of the job description? During the interview process, are you touching on culture and ethics, right? So this is an area where you can engage the workforce, engage your interview panels, engage your people leaders, but also engage the community. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but not every applicant gets hired. But you're leaving with those applicants. I see you smiling, John. Every applicant you've interviewed, though, is walking away with some view of your organization. I used to have referrals, and I used to have follow-up from candidates I did not hire who appreciated the interview process, who valued how I treated them through the interview process, and learned from it and did better in another interview somewhere else. And so you can actually impact people through your culture and through your school, even if you don't end up hiring them. So talent acquisition is one way you can do it. Orientation, for sure. It starts day one. It should really be collaborative with HR and leadership together. It lets you model behavior, and you're presenting information, right? You're giving stories, you're presenting information. I think some of the most successful orientations I've ever delivered and been part of made sure that whatever functional area of the organization we were talking about, quality, teaching, academic, whatever it may be, the leader of that department should be presenting it, or have a little video of them introducing it, depending on your size, and then someone else from that department presenting. But put a name and face to each functional area. Put a name and face to how they get help, to who to go to where that information is coming from. Let that person tell the story. If you only have HR doing orientation and no one from the business side, no one from the school is involved, it's a mistake. You really should have a collaborative effort when you're doing orientation. When you move to onboarding is no longer for the same message for everybody. Orientation should be school-wide. This is what everybody needs to know. Onboarding should start narrowing it down to job-specific training. The tools, resources, and support that professional, that expert needs to do their job successfully. And then what's the point of doing onboarding? Well, it's to set them up for success. What need does it fulfill? Well, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy, you know, we're really hitting in that social interaction, the self-esteem of being comfortable and confident in knowing what to do, and then they can hit that self-actualization because they feel good in their job. They know what's expected of them. And generally, once someone knows what's expected of them, they do much better. I can't tell you, even as a consultant, if I go into an organization and they say they're hiring me for X, and then they go, well, we're not really sure what we want to accomplish, it kind of ruins the whole engagement. Because if I don't know what they need to accomplish or where they're going, then I don't know what's expected of me coming in to help them. If you have new teachers, if you have, even with the students, whatever it is, if they're not sure what's expected of them in each day or each activity, they don't know how to succeed, and then they can never have that win or that success. So onboarding is key, but it starts getting more narrowed down focused to that. Performance management, your engagement, and you brought this up earlier, several of you, about trust. When you're doing performance management, you're having those one-on-one conversations, hopefully in person nowadays, where you get to genuinely share your care for that other human being. If you show and demonstrate, not just if you say to somebody, I really care about you. Okay, that doesn't mean much. But if you don't even say it and you just demonstrate and you ask them questions and you're showing them that you care about their true success, that you care about them as a person, that you care about their success, when you break down those walls and barriers and there's trust established and followership, they'll run through walls for you. They'll jump through bridges for you, right? They'll do anything you need, and they're more likely in that mutually beneficial relationship to let you know when something went wrong. So if you have trust and they believe you care about them, they'll come to you and say, hey, I just messed this up the other day and I'm not sure how to fix it. Now it's not about punishment, it's about learning, because we all learn from mistakes, and growing, and you'll have that feedback. So performance management is really key, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have this whole performance review system, but performance management is about giving constructive feedback, good and bad feedback, to the direct people that you're managing and responsible for. Stay interviews. If you're not doing stay interviews, you should consider it. This is where you have a cross cut of the functional areas in your organization, especially areas of high turnover. And throughout the year, you're meeting with them and you're randomly asking them specific questions, intentional questions, to understand what challenges may exist in your culture and your processes and your practices, challenges they face, and find ways to correct or adjust it and eliminate those obstacles so they can be successful. If you're doing that and they feel that engagement, that interaction is a way to retain those folks, especially it gives them a voice to be heard. And again, you're modeling behaviors, right? And so they see you demonstrating these skills, and that becomes that culture, right? And that's those actions and behavioral norms. Engagement surveys are critical, but I don't recommend doing them every year. This is kind of an every other year large event where everybody is involved. You get everybody into the process. And as you're doing these, what I found most successful through my career in doing these is, if you're not willing to be transparent and share the results, at least summarize, not John said this, Mary said this, Tim said this, but summarize themes of what came back, share it with the organization, and then create cross-functional inclusive teams to address those challenges and come up with solutions, it'll fail. The worst thing is to do an engagement survey. Everybody volunteers, contributes information, and then at the end of the day, they never hear back from you, or they don't see any change, or they don't know what happened. So successful engagement allows you to, again, model those behaviors of your culture, communicate really effectively, and involve everybody in solving the problems. Less people will leave your school if they get to be part of solving the problems. If they have a voice and can contribute to making things better, why would they leave? You know, the grass is always greener on the other side until you get there and realize you still don't have a voice there either. So if you want to have an environment where everybody stays and is part of the solution, engaging them in an effective way is what's going to work. And exit interviews, for sure. You know, an exit interview is important because people get really honest when they're pissed at you and they quit. They often are really happy to tell you what's wrong with you, but it's critical information. And if you treat them professionally and respectfully, don't use this as a means to change their mind. If they've already made the decision, let them go, but engage them respectfully and with dignity to say, We understand you're leaving the organization. We understand there's probably reasons or triggers of why. We are truly dedicated to fixing these problems for our current workforce and the future. And we'd hope you'd be willing to share some information with us and make sure it's a consistent set of questions. It's not 10 hours long. Boom, an hour, you're in, you're out. You get the information you need and you wish them the best. That demonstrates tremendous care and respect for people, but it'll also give you information to make changes in the organization. Any questions on those items of engagement? I've got a couple more slides to talk to you about our success factors and then their practical application. But Jane, were there any questions or anybody want to go off mute and ask questions about engagement? No. Okay, I'll go on. So, Peter Drucker, one of the most famous, renowned business leaders out there, talks about if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, right? And so if you create a culture and you're not doing anything to manage it and evaluate it and watch it, there's no point of even trying to build it. I mean, it already exists. Every organization has a culture, whether you've tried to create it, manipulate it, influence it or not. There's culture everywhere. However, if you're trying to build a particular culture and drive it to be successful, you've got to measure it. And you already have reports. You have retention reports, you have missions reports, you have school events, who attended them, what's going on, feedback surveys. You're already doing things that collect data, but are you tying the data into, if I'm trying to hit 85% and I'm at 70% in my data and whatever I'm measuring, is there anything that I can do based on our culture, based on our values, based on our core vision that I can adjust to get that goal? So when I talk about human resources to organizations and they go, oh, you can't improve our productivity, you can't improve this, they don't recognize or just don't have the training to see how HR actions impact those results. Just like from an IT perspective, from a legal perspective, from a leadership perspective. So all these have to come together. Your culture can help you drive greater success if you actually take advantage of and measure it. And then people leadership training is critical. If you don't take intentional time multiple times through the year to train people leaders and reinforce the culture, skill sets they need to do everything we talked about today, you can sit up in the ivory tower and say, culture is great and we're going to do this. But if you don't give those tools to the people who actually execute it, you're going to fail. So you really want to make sure you're focused on these things and that you're not ignoring training as you go through that process. And then just practical strategies. This is what I love giving everybody and everything I do, whether it's in our book that we wrote or just in life in general. I want you to be able to start doing things right away. And so these things on this chart really are things you should be able to think about and immediately start doing differently for yourself. I would recommend that every organization reviews on an annual basis or even more frequently their mission, vision, and values. Because if you look at your mission, vision, and values and go, oh, 18 years ago, we wrote this thing, and you're not making it modern and you're not making it relevant and you're not realigning it with the culture that you have, you could have a mismatch, right? And one of the things I do with organizations is something as simple as an agenda. When you have a staff meeting and you have an agenda, what's written on the agenda? Do you have your mission, vision, and values written on the agenda? Do you have some reminder that reinforces your culture on everything you do, on every piece of paper, every material? Is it reinforced? That's something you can implement pretty easily moving forward. Make sure HR is at the table for collaboration and building an inclusive team. HR are those professional experts who are trained and have the skill sets to help you bring the people aspect into the other operational activities that you're doing and academic activities that you're doing, right? They're supposed to have these skill sets around building those inclusive teams. During one-on-one meetings, make sure you have, and Andre loves this, he talks about it in our book pretty often, culture conversations. Don't ignore actually calling it a culture conversation if you want, right? Where you're going to discuss, here's our culture, here's our mission, vision, here's our values. How effectively are you, whoever you're talking to, how effectively do you think you promote this? What can we do differently to help you even do better? Where are you having gaps? Where are we as an organization not supporting you? Are you out there demonstrating the culture and yet management isn't, right? So have those conversations, build that transparency, model the behaviors. You as leaders are being watched, and modeling that behavior is going to go so far. Before you even open your mouth, they're watching what you do and how you do it. The third bullet from the bottom is critical. Your leadership team should look each other in the eye and agree to hold each other accountable. Meaning, I'm going to tell you, hey, if I step out of line, if I'm off the tracks, if I'm doing something contrary to what we've our culture, I need someone to smack me on the back of the head and say, hey, hold on, you're doing something wrong here. And I don't mean physically actually hit anybody, but you need to be aware, right? You need to be made aware that, hey, you're going in another direction. We're no longer aligned, and be willing to hold each other accountable to those standards. Because if you don't, people will see what you're doing and they'll think there's misalignment with the leadership team. And then again, job descriptions, look at your current job descriptions and embed cultural requirements, expectations, and responsibilities in there, and then train your staff. You really need to get in there and train your people leaders. So I'm going to wrap that up. There's one more slide that Andre is going to talk to as far as the next webinar coming up. But any questions, any thoughts, any feedback, pick my brain. I don't have an end time limit, but I want to respect your time, and we're a few minutes over. But I'm not going anywhere, so time is all yours. And thank you so much for being here this evening. And you can go off mute and talk, whatever's comfortable. I'm happy to interact.
Thank you, Warren. So we'll just open the floor. So yeah, please do field any questions. We've had a couple of questions about strategic planning.
Okay.
Some people wanting. I asked a question about the interviews. Some interest there about interviews and interview preparation. So that's something that we can definitely look at in due course. So yeah, if you have questions now for Warren, or if you would like to, take anything further, then please bring it up now. We'll keep the window open for you now.
Yeah, and while you're thinking of your questions, those two topics, strategic planning, building your strategic plans, it's often really effective to have someone kind of facilitating and guiding that to give everybody the ability to be inclusive and add their thoughts. But your strategic planning, your 2, 3, 5-year plans or beyond, really need to think about any external factors that could impact your culture. If there's major shifts happening in retention, if there's high turnover, if you're about to open a school in new locations, all those should really have an intentional SWOT analysis and thoughts around culture. How it's one thing to have, let's say you have 3 schools right now, all in one area, one relative area, and they're doing great and the culture is great, and you go and open in another country. You should not be expecting the culture to be an instant success, right? You should expect a lot of challenges, obstacles, and other problems. So your strategic planning should be addressing how do you maintain and sustain culture. And flipping around to the other topic I think you mentioned was interview preparation. Yeah, if you're exploring opportunities, if you're exploring advancing your career, if you're exploring looking at that next job in your journey, how you prepare for the interviews is really critical to differentiate and articulate. There's so many applicants out there now. There's so much turnover. There's so many people looking. It becomes harder and harder to be the top candidate, whether it's through an applicant tracking system or not. And so how you learn to articulate your value and differentiate through the interview process, just in being behavioral responses and things like that, is critical. And we have a whole extensive program around this, because my entire career in HR, I've been trying to help people grow, and I've developed this entire interview preparation to help people succeed. So those topics are great. Raised hand from somebody. Yay, I love that. Go ahead.
My question is, you've given a lot of great ideas for creating a culture and going from kind of a ground zero up. But what do you do if you're going into a situation where the culture is quite negative or toxic and you're trying to counter all the things? What are some strategies that you would have for turning that around when you don't have the trust, you don't have the consistency set already for you?
Right. No, great question. So I apologize if I made this out to be rainbows and unicorns, because most cultures aren't really super successful. Most people have an inaccurate view of the culture, or these 2 teams over here are woohoo, look at us, and these 3 teams over here are toxic and ready to go because it's terrible, right? So the first thing, Kate, is getting the leadership to acknowledge the problem. Leadership has to come to grips and have that meeting. Some people say it's the come to Jesus meeting or whatever you want to reference it, but have that honest conversation of, this isn't working. We have people who are not aligned with us. We have people who are unhappy. We have people who are leaving. If you've got retention more than like 5 or 7%, you've got problems. Now, if they purely leave because there's nowhere to grow, that's one thing. But if you say people are leaving because they hate it here, because they don't have a voice, because leadership treats them terribly, because the academic programs don't align with them, whatever those problems are, you first have to acknowledge the problem. If you don't say there's a problem, then there's nothing to fix. Okay. Now, from a toxic perspective, it's really going to rely on accountability. I think organizations that are failing that I go into and I consult with, the first thing I find that's wrong is there a complete lack of accountability, even in leadership. I'll say, well, why are they doing that? They go, oh, they all just do that. And I go, well, don't they work for you? Yeah. So why do they all still have jobs? What do you mean? Well, fire them all. If they're toxic, get rid of all of them. Oh my God, how are we going to succeed? How are we going to grow? How are we going to get the work done? Oh, okay, so you're okay with all these toxic people misaligned with your culture, sending the wrong message and mistreating people working in your school? No, not really. Okay, so you're talking out of both sides of your mouth, right? But a lot of times it takes an outside voice to bring the reason in, which is why there's consultants, which is why I exist, right? I come in and I usually I'm brought in by somebody who's really concerned about the direction of an organization. They say, we're trying to accomplish X. There's like half of us or 3/4 of us really want to get there, but there's some people not helping us get there, or there's obstacles to that success. And I start with, great, well, let's get some mutual goals. Let's bring those people together, and I'll sit in a room and I'll talk to people and I'll say, why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here? What is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? And suddenly I've got 9 people saying they want to do this and 2 people saying they want to do that. And I say, ask those 2 people, are you on board? This is where we're going. No, we'd expect your resignation by the end of the day. And people go, what did he just say to them? What happened? One of them stays on board going, I'll change because I want to feed my family. And the other person's like, see you, bye. And suddenly some of the toxicity is gone, but you're showing immediately that leadership will come together and make changes. If you're not willing to find some immediate low-hanging fruit that you can address to change, to show the organization you mean what you say, it will never happen. And oftentimes, no matter how intelligent, how educated, how smart, how many years you've been leading people, it's really hard individually in an organization that's already toxic or not where they want to be to drive and lead that change without some help. Because it's kind of the same old thing. Doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? It's ludicrous. It doesn't work. And sometimes people have hit their max of how they can influence the rest of the people around them. So I come into organizations, I give them new tools, new perspective, new resources, and I hold people accountable and I teach them how to hold them accountable. By the way, not in a mean way, not in a negative way. To me, I don't even use the term discipline. I stopped using the term discipline like 15 years ago. I call it corrective action because to me, discipline is punitive. Your kid goes and knocks the cookie jar over and you smack them on the butt. That's discipline. If an employee isn't doing what you need them to do, we need to give them the tools, resources, support to be successful. Because when I ask somebody, if a leader said to me, listen, this one teacher, they're so toxic, they're a problem, they're advocating against what we're trying to do, they're really just a problem and a thorn in our side and we can't fix it. My response isn't fire that person. My response initially is, well, when you first hired Jane Doe or John Doe, I bet you were happy. I bet you're like, oh my God, we can't believe they're joining the organization, right? At some point, there was a good relationship. Try to take yourself mentally back to that point and say, where did they fail or where did we fail? Did we fail training them? Did we fail holding them accountable? Did we fail listening to them? Re-engage that person, start the conversation, and as my dad used to say, give them enough rope to hang themselves. Because if you do everything you're supposed to in giving them the tools for success and they don't get on board and they don't change their behaviors, even after you train them and help them and talk with them, then it's time to exit. And normally they do something themselves that warrants the exit anyway. But identify these people, and I spend a lot of time just teaching people how to hold people accountable. I mean, I've been in meetings where I've had a CEO or leader of an organization or school bring in the problem person and they'll say, oh my God, it's so nice to meet you today, Warren. It's been great. Oh, that thing you did the other day is good. By the way, we're really not happy with what you're doing with A, B, and C. But you know what? Are you coming to the event on Friday? Oh, that's great. They just did what I call Oreo cookie or sandwich or taco, whatever you want to call it. They never sent the message because they're afraid to communicate the truth. They're afraid of the consequences. They're afraid of holding that person accountable. And so I teach people how to have those crucial conversations on both sides, teach them how to manage up and have a voice. I teach an organization how to get those slow shifts to align with their culture. Because if it's toxic, no matter how hard you're trying to really take care of your students, really grow your admissions, really have and retain your teachers, the problem, the root cause is often with leadership. You know, I will tell you, one of the tactics I use right in the beginning of an engagement is whoever the leader of the organization is, whoever's hiring me. Sometimes they'll say, Warren, what's the problem? And I would take, well, I've got my book here. I would take a book and I would say, imagine this book is a mirror and I'm going to show you the problem with your organization. And I hold it up to their face. And some of them go, I'm never going to work with you. I said, great, fine. We probably wouldn't have gotten along anyway. But some of them go, oh, you know what? Yeah, I might be the problem. I don't know how to do X, or I'm not sure how to hold them accountable. Or I need a mentor. A lot of leaders have never had a coach or a mentor themselves, right? And so giving them the opportunity to say, you can have trust and confidence in your team where you really work well together and be open about your mistakes and shortcomings, you can start moving the needle. I don't know if anybody's ever read Keith Ferrazzi's book on Never Eat Alone, and he has another one about Who's Got Your Back. But he actually came in when I worked with Lincoln Financial. They're a $52 billion financial organization. I advised the senior leadership team, so the CEO and his executive leadership team. First time I managed a guy, I mentored a guy who was making $10 million a year. But he came into our leadership team meetings and implemented this one thing that changed their lives forever. He came in, and I've been doing this for years with leadership teams. He came into the leadership team and said, we're going to start something new before every meeting. We're going to go around the room and we're going to have what's called a personal and professional check-in. Everybody's going to say one thing that's going good or bad professionally and one thing going good or bad personally. And immediately some people are like, I'm not sharing personally. I'm not doing it. So, okay, fine. But as they went around the room, there was this one toxic person, Kate, right? There was this one toxic person. They were viewed as toxic, but apparently what was happening is they kind of disengaged. They weren't really participating. They stopped contributing. When they got to their personal professional check-in, and when she shared with the group that her husband got cancer and was dying, the tears that were flowing in that room and the sudden respect and how they all felt bad for how they were treating her, it just blew up the room. And now suddenly people were looking at each other as human, and how do we help each other, and how do we promulgate this, and how do we support each other as a leadership team, as one voice. That was critical. Another organization I worked with was a law firm, and they had a new CEO, and they all hated him. They wanted him gone. And I asked the CEO, COO, are you willing to listen to the team give you feedback? I'm willing. I said, listen, John, it's going to hurt. It's going to be painful. So he came in the room and they all were like, you're not willing to move here. You're not willing to do this. You're not available. You're constantly traveling back to North Carolina, blah, blah, blah. And they said, we don't want you. And he says, all right. He started crying. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. He says, I'm sorry you all feel that way. I've obviously let you down, but I'm having a hard time finding a local school for my son who's autistic. That's why I haven't moved here yet. And you should see how embarrassed these people were, right? So breaking down leadership teams to really come to a alignment, truly trust. You've all brought up trust each other, that they're working for a common goal. They have a symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationship to accomplish the goal for the school. I help people see that and then harness that to drive change. When you do that at the top, and you got to start at the top, they can start modeling the behavior. All those toxic activities and behaviors start going away if they hold them accountable, if they start modeling the change, if they start pushing it out. But by the way, Kate, it's not an overnight thing. It could take a year to change that culture, because you're going to need changes in behaviors, changes in processes and practices, and changes in people. It can be done anywhere. It can be done, but you have to have commitment to do it, and you have to have buy-in to do it. Sorry that was long-winded, but hopefully that was valuable information. Yeah. Any other thoughts or feedback?
Yeah. Another question from Henny. He asked, how can we create a culture where teachers want to stay versus them leaving only for a better salary?
So great question. So one of the things that I teach and train when I'm talking about talent acquisition strategies and interviewing strategies on the employer side, we prepare candidates, but we also prepare the employer for doing this really effectively, is looking at motivational factors. So if you're familiar with intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors, we all have them. And so an organization, for example, if an organization spends a lot of time building a rewards and recognition program, and every time someone does something good, they give them a $250 gift card. And then they start wondering why people aren't really going after that goal anymore. Why aren't people striving to achieve that? Why don't they do better to get that gift card? They've only hit their extrinsic motivator. They've got a carrot out in front of them. On my presentation that I do on this, the training on this, there's a little carrot on a stick, right? So you're holding this stick with a carrot and you're trying to get the employee to grab that carrot, right? It really works well in sales. Salespeople are really driven by that. However, most of us are not extrinsically driven in our lives and our careers. It's the intrinsic values. So I've gone into organizations where they're like, listen, we give everybody like quarterly bonuses, we give annual bonuses, and they still leave. And I said, well, when's the last time you asked the employees what's really important to them? When I interviewed 15 of your employees, they all wish they had some flexibility in their work schedule. When I interviewed your employees, they really wanted to know why you don't have a dental plan. When I interviewed your employees, they really wanted to know why there's no annual meeting to give them information on the school. Like they weren't hitting what was valuable and important to their people. So if you don't have someone leading your people charge, really engaging your people culture, engaging the employees to say, why do you want to work for our school? If when they interview and they find out, why are they working here? Oh, because I want to make a lot of money. Okay, well, you just keep giving that person more money and they'll stay. But if there's any other factors that you're uncovering and capturing and returning back to the leadership team and discussing, how are you ever going to build an environment where people are going to stay? Because you're not even listening to why they work. You're not listening to what's important to them. And by the way, if you don't do this consistently, Henny, if you don't do it consistently, you're going to fail. Because if you hire a bunch of college graduates, they have a goal. As soon as they get that girlfriend and get married or boyfriend and get married, the goal changes. As soon as they have that kid, goal changes. As soon as they buy that first house, the goal changes, right? So you can't just look at your organization and say, here's what motivates them. You have to find ways to continuously engage the human capital, find out what the shifting motivational factors are, and adjust your rewards program to that, your benefits to that, your environment to that. I've had organizations where the group was just thrilled and happy that they gave them a day a month to go do volunteer work in the community. They were so passionate about social and responsibility and social equity and being out there that the organization said, well, what if we gave everybody a paid day off once a month to do whatever you'd like and we'll support you in the community? Woo! Thrilled, right? And then more people wanted to come join that company because they did that. And they also modeled it, communicated it, advertised it, broadcast that part of their culture is serving the community. So there's a lot of ways to do it to stop that. If you have bleeding because of people leaving over money, we should sit down and talk, because there's a tremendous amount of strategies you can implement that don't cost a lot to do. It's just awareness, behaviors, and changing practices to solve that problem. And you'll never solve it completely, because if someone's attracted somewhere else because of just money, they're going to go. You can't stop that person. But it's harder to take a change. It's harder to change jobs for $5,000 or $10,000 when you're getting everything you're passionate about in your current job. If you're getting heard, if you're engaged, if your needs are met, if your professional development is met, if your values around your family are met, that 10 grand looks less and less enticing, because you don't know when I go across the fence there if they're going to give me all these same valuable things that I've got now. My work schedule, my benefits, my programs, my time off, my whatever it is. So it's diving into that, and a lot of organizations don't pay attention to it. They hire in bulk and volume. They don't pay attention to why they hired people. They throw them in there and then they lose them. Do you know, can anybody here tell me how much it costs an organization to replace somebody who leaves? What is the annual financial cost of losing a resource? Anybody go off mute and chime in on what you think the cost is? Anyone? Be brave.
Come on, fraction, have a guess.
What do you think, Kate? I'll call you out. Sorry.
I don't know, between 5 and 10 grand.
33% of their annual salary. is the average cost. And the cost isn't just about how much it is to post the job or market a position. The cost includes non-financial as well. You have the cost of marketing the job, posting the job, the resources to do the interviews. You have the employees who have to pick up the slack. The employees have to do the work of that person who's longer over there. The employee relations issues, the overtime costs, right? The morale. There's so much negative. If I was going to interview at your school and I found out that 20% of the teachers leave every year, you don't have a chance in hell of getting me to hire there at work there, because you have a terrible culture because no one wants to stay, right? So it's a major problem when organizations have high turnover. It is sending a message to the world that something is missing in your organization, right? And so you have to fix that if you're going to attract talent. You have to fix that if you're going to retain talent. You have to fix that if you want to deliver your services and your academics to the students. Because if I'm a parent and I go, wait a minute, every year you lose all your teachers, oh my God, something's wrong with that place, right? I mean, it's sending messages, even though they're going to make up their own story in their mind of why. They don't know the real why, but it's a reality. And so you have to be having members of your leadership team from an HR perspective or outside consultants like Andre or me who can come in there and help you figure these problems out and solve them. If you lose 10 teachers and each teacher made $100,000 a year, that's $300,000 in cost plus lost productivity. There's no one to do the work, right? So significant. It's significant to your business and to your school to make sure you're hiring the right people and then that you're retaining them and that you have the strategies. As you mentioned, Henny, like what do you do to keep them? You have the strategies to do that. So if you're running into these problems or your leadership's running these problems or you need solutions for this, that's why we have the free consult. You just schedule a call with us and we kind of go through it and tell you how we can solve these problems for you. And it's not for you, it's with you. When I go into organizations, I never walk in and solve the problem for them. I can't. If any consultant tells you they will fix your problems, do not hire them. What they can do is they can teach you, help you, and guide you through knowledge transfer and support and tools to solve the problem for yourself, because you cannot sustain a solution if someone else does it for you. Other thoughts or comments? This is great. I know it's getting later there, but now the sun's up here. This has been great. Anyway, do you want to talk about the next webinar, Andre? And if anyone else has questions, I'm happy to facilitate responses, but don't want to neglect the last
thank you very much,
slide.
Warren.
Yep.
So our next webinar is on Friday, Leading Your International School Sustainably. We do hope that some of you will join us. If not all of you will join us for that. Well, we'll kind of go into a deep dive across kind of curriculum, facility, and school design, you know, how each of those factors are important. We did mention before about webinars that you are interested in. If you are interested in people leadership, in human resources, in strategic planning, and drop us a line and let us know what kind of webinars that you would be welcome in us providing for you. You know, we're always happy to kind of meet the needs of the international teachers and the market. We will be having some webinars in September and October about interview preparation at both the teacher end and the school end. So if you're a teacher looking to, you know, perhaps move on to Pastors New, or on the flip side of that, if you are a leader who's going to be interviewing, our next webinars are designed to sort of help you through that process. As Warren mentioned before, you know, looking at how can you really add value to yourself as a candidate, and from the school, you know, how can you really minimize the risk that, you know, of the applicant that you will be hiring. So once again, thank you very much to Warren. You are free to leave. If you'd like to follow up with a consultation, Jane, can you just go back to Warren's screen there? Just go back to the previous. If anybody would like to follow up with Warren, if you'd like to take him up on the offer of a free consultation, then please do get in touch with Warren. His email address is there. And otherwise, we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, everybody. Hope you have a good rest of your evening, and good luck with application of this stuff. It's good stuff. I am passionate about it. I'm sure you saw that.
We love passion.
I live and breathe this stuff. Yeah, it's good stuff.
I'm inheriting that passion from you. Don't worry.
Perfect. Well, thank you all.
Oh.
Thank you for participating. I know it's not easy to jump in and join a webinar and get out there and speak, but it's good that you involve yourselves, and you'll always get more out of it if the presenter allows you to do that. So it's my style of it. So thank you,
Okay,
everybody. I really appreciate
Yeah,
it.
And thank you very much for those lovely warm comments as well. We appreciate that.
Yeah, if we can get a group picture together, that would be great. All right. Okay.
Yay. Now we'll all be famous.
Okay, if anyone has any burning questions that they want to come back to Warren, then please do hang on.
I'll hang in. Otherwise, I wish you all a great evening. You can drop off at your
As I
leisure.
say, you are free to go. Jane, you can stop the recording.